Yeah, I think we can start. So maybe thank you once again for joining us. We'll start our session in a few. So today we have an amazing speaker. He has been a speaker for a number of our sessions, and it's a pleasure having him once again. So I'll let you introduce yourself. Yeah, you can get started.
Okay, I guess I'll do that in the next slide. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Shiax for giving me this opportunity. And I hope I'll be able to transfer some knowledge to you all about Kerberos. So a little bit about myself. My name's Amajit Laburam. I'm the technical director at Macrosec Limited, where I do a lot of cybersecurity research, focused a lot more on offensive security. And I like doing red teaming and pen testing sort of engagements. Then my hobbies are farming, fishing, DJing, and I'm a foodie and a coffee lover. So that's a little bit about myself. Now, what we're going to do today, I just did a brief agenda. I hope to be able to cover all of these in the sense that what I've got in white or gray is supposed to be with demos, and the other four, the last ones in red, will not be demoing, but I'll definitely speak on them. So I'll just do the whole slide presentation, kill you with my slides, then I'll do a little bit of a demo at the end. So what is Kerberos? So we're just going to do like a little bit 101 on Kerberos. Basically, this is an authentication protocol that was introduced to Windows, I think by MIT. Yeah, MIT are the ones who came up with the whole technology around Kerberos. And it also gets its name from the three-headed hound from the Greek mythology, which is the dog that guards the gates of hell to ensure no souls enter or leave without authorization. So basically, the way this whole protocol works is it uses tickets to authorize and authenticate to various services in a Windows network. These tickets, once received by an end user computer, get stored in memory. So of that device until your session expires, meaning like when you log out of your machine. So when you log in, from that point onwards, Kerberos actually is running in the background as an authentication mechanism if you're in a Windows AD network. So what is Kerberos? So it may be a little daunting when you look at this image, but we'll sort of break it down and try and understand what's going on, because it's good to understand the protocol before we go and look at the various attacks that can be done against it. So just like, as I mentioned, the Greek hound called Kerberos, it's actually called Cerberus, but that's a play on words for Kerberos. It relies on three parts. So there's going to be a client or an end user. Then you're going to have what's called a key distribution center, which is usually a domain controller in a Windows network. And you have a resource server that will be, that's a server that's hosting a specific service. So it could be a web server, it could be a mail server, a file share server, and whatever resources that the domain users would need to access. So I'll also just give you, because these are all in acronyms, so I'll just run down what the different acronyms are. You can see TGT. TGT stands for Ticket Granting Ticket, which establishes a trust between the client and the key distribution center. Then you have what's known as the key distribution center itself, or the domain controller. And you have a resource server. So the role of the domain controller is basically authentication. So it verifies the authentication of that the user that's requesting for the service is a valid user on the domain, whereas the resource server is where the authorization happens. So there's moving parts within this, and that's why there are various attacks that can be leveraged based on this chain. Maybe I'll just start with a little analogy about what you can think of as Kerberos because of all these things, and then we'll break down and look through each protocol as it happens. So imagine if you're going to when you're going to Mombasa, you have to board a train, right? So let's say you get to Syokimau or wherever you're boarding your train from, you need to first purchase a ticket. So that ticket will allow you, and that's usually against, let's say, your ID or some form of identification. And the only challenge is maybe in this scenario, you're given a ticket that has a time limit. So in that aspect, you need to buy that platform ticket against your ID, and you have a time limit for when that ticket can be used. So once you have the platform ticket, that now means you can enter the train station. You will be allowed to move around at the train station. But then you may not be able to access all trains because there are various trains that are moving through that train station. But your ticket will say there's a specific train that you can board, and also you'll have a seat number. So think of that train as your resource, as you can see, the resource server, and you want a specific resource on that. So that's like your ticket, your seat on that train. And again, as I said, to access just the train station, you needed to validate yourself with your ID. So once you have that, when you're boarding your train, that's now the point where you're authorizing with the resource server. It will verify that, yes, you're a valid ticket holder and you're accepted on this train. So you'll be given access to your seat. So that's how the whole process works. But we can break it down further now the technical way. So when the first request is made, the user, for the whole chain to work, a secret value needs to be used. This can verify that the identity of the client and the default secret. This will identify the client, and this needs to have a secret. Usually this secret is the encrypted NTLM hash of the user. So, and by user in an Active Directory context, it could either be a computer or an actual user, as in a human being, or an account, a user account that's on the network. So when I use the term user in this context, remember it could be any of these, right? So once the NTLM hash is encrypted, it is then used to request for a ticket granting ticket. So a TGT stands for ticket granting ticket, which is then, that request is sent to the key distribution center. Once the key distribution center verifies that this request is coming from a valid user, it then issues a TGT, which is a ticket granting ticket to the client. So remember, the first one is you're requesting for a TGT. And if it sees you're a valid user, it will then send you back a ticket granting ticket plus a session key. Then from there, so with that, the client needs to then access, when the client wants to access a service on another server, it then sends this ticket granting ticket to the key distribution center once more and requests for a ticket granting service ticket to the specified resource that it wants to access. So I'll just stop there a little bit just to maybe give you another overview in now technical when we're in a Windows network. When you log onto your machine, you enter in your password at the login screen and things happen in the background. As a user, you just get access to what you need on the machine plus the network. Now think about, let's say there's a file share on a specific server on the domain. If we didn't have Kerberos in place, you would have to then, every time you access a file share, you have to key in your password and authenticate to that service. So imagine you log in the morning and maybe at 10 o'clock, you need to pull out some report or something from a specific file share. You go there, it'll ask you for authentication, you key in, that's the end of the session. I mean, it'll grant you access to the files if you have the correct authorization. Then maybe again, by midday afternoon, you have various servers that you're going to repetitively authenticate to. So every time you will have to then put in your username and password and authenticate against these things. So in a way, when Microsoft thought of, or what the technology does, it sort of forms like a single sign-on. So once you authenticate onto your Windows host machine, your NTLM hash is stored because, of course, I mean, when you put in your password, it's encrypted and stored as an NTLM hash. Now, that NTLM hash is what we say is sent to the key distribution center to request for a ticket granting ticket. So that's the initial state. So that also usually happens the moment you even log in to your machine. Then, as I said, now later on, you're requesting for a file share. So when you're requesting for that file share is when it's like you're requesting now for a ticket granting service ticket for access to the file share. So automatically, when you go and open that shared folder, in the background, what Kerberos is doing is it's running all these tickets back and forth so this whole chain happens, and you don't need to keep on repeating, entering your password for every file share that you need to access on the network. So everything is running through stored credentials in memory. That's why we say that it's cached for the session. So going forward, when this TGS 10, okay, so once you've got your ticket granting service from your ticket granting service ticket from your key distribution center, this ticket granting service ticket, sorry, there's going to be a lot of terminology with this, so I'm apologizing in advance if I keep butchering the things, but we'll try and keep it as clear as possible. So once you this ticket granting service ticket is requested, it tends to be encrypted with the service account password hash. So for that would be the file server, and if there's a service account that's running that specific service. For example, let's now leave file share. Let's say it's an SQL database. So there is a service account that is running with an authenticated capacity on that server. So for when you request for this ticket granting service ticket, when you receive it, it will also be encrypted with the NTLM hash of that service account. And it's also composed of two parts. So the ticket granting service ticket has two parts. There's one which is the ticket itself, and this is the one that is sent to the resource server. And then there's also the session key, so which the user, the client, keeps. So that's the one that has like a time limit for when, like I explained with the ticket for the train, you have a time limit for when you can jump onto the train. So even this has a time limit of by when it can expire. So once you have the TGS ticket, it could also, so the TGS ticket itself, as I mentioned, it has two parts. It has the ticket itself and the session key. So the ticket itself contains user details. These are like your access levels, which the KDC knows. So when the user, so a copy of this session key is kept with the user, while that ticket that is now holding what we call a pack. A pack is, I think, what is the definition of a pack? A pack is a privilege attribute certificate. So this gives all the privileges and that the user has for the specific resource that's being requested for. So that's why I said that the authentication is done by the KDC, but the authorization is done by the resource server. So that's why your TGS ticket contains that pack, which has all the details of the access levels you have. So when it's sent to the resource server, it then knows that this user is allowed to access, as I said, if it's the database, if it's just a normal user, maybe he has only view access to certain table spaces. So that detail is now stored in the pack that's stored within the TGS ticket. So we'll just go through this whole chain a bit broken down now. So the first step, as you saw, was the TGT request. So the user password is converted from to an NTLM hash. Then a timestamp is encrypted with the hash and sent to the KDC to authenticate the client. If the client is a member of the domain, you will receive a TGT with a session key. So that's why I said the session key is is the one that has the time limit to how long that ticket is valid. Then the TGT, as I mentioned, okay, so once you get the TGT is received, the request is received by the KDC, it will encrypt and sign that TGT and return it back to, it will now create that ticket granting ticket and send it back to the client. So at each stage, you'll notice like with the first step, there's what's called the AS request, and then there's the AS response. So that's the second step. That's when the TGT is encrypted and sent back to the client. The third step is the ticket request plus authorization. So this is now, as per the slide, if you see here, that's step number 3. So you're looking at now requesting for a ticket to authorize for a specific service. So in that context, the client presents the TGT back to the key distribution center and requests the ticket granting service ticket for the resource that the client wants to authenticate for. So the KDC will then open this TGT and validate what I talked about, the pack, that this user does have access to the service. And these are the different access rights they have for the specific service. So that's contained within the TGS. Right. After that, the next bit is the actual TG ticket and authentication. So this is the response now sent back. So this is the TGS ticket that is encrypted and with a request, with a requested service. And that's with the NTLM hash password, the NTLM password hash, and sent back to the client. So the client now receives a ticket granting service ticket. That's the ticket that, as I mentioned, it's like the train ticket that says your seat number. So from there, the client can connect to the resource server and present this TGS ticket for the service. The service will then open this TGS ticket with its NTLM, with its own NTLM password hash. Once it goes through it, it will see that, yes, this is an authorized user. If it is, it will check the pack. It will see what authorization level you have on the requested resource and either grant you. If you don't have the right authorization, then authentication, it will reject and block you off from there. So a key aspect of all this to work is what we call an SPN. An SPN is a service principal name, which is a unique identifier for a service instance. And it uses the Kerberos authentication to associate a service instance with the service logon account. So for example, as you can see on the screen, this is how you can create, this is how a service SPN would look like. So the first bit is the actual service that you're requesting for. So this is an SQL server or SQL database, and then it's running on this server, which is server 01 on this domain on a specific port. And the last bit is the actual service name that is authorized to authenticate users to this SQL database. And I've also put down a quick, you can run this command in PowerShell, and you should be able to, within a domain context, which will then list out for you the various service principal names that are set up on the domain. So as I mentioned, like you can see, this is for the SQL database. So the SPN is the one that maps between the service and the account. And the client does not need to know the SPN because they just authenticated and they want to access, let's say, as I said, the information on a specific table space. So they don't want to bother with authentication and all that. In the background, this is what's happening. So when the client wants to communicate with that SQL service on server 1, a request is made to the KDC that knows it needs to map the appropriate service account, in this instance, which is SQL service. And using the NTLM hash of that SQL service, it will encrypt the ticket granting service ticket that is sent back to the client to then forward now to the resource server, which is on server 01, and access that SQL service that's running on the server. I hope that is clear. So with that, there are a number, because of the whole way Kerberos works, as you saw with the authentication chain, there are various stages within this authentication mapping that an attacker can abuse. And as you mentioned, a lot of this is getting encrypted with NTLM hashes, either of the end user or of the service. Or so if you're able to, if you're using weak passwords, an attacker can, how do you say, proxy or get these requests or push for these requests and get these encrypted keys. And there are tools out there that can then crack these. So John the Ripper and Hashcat are some of these. So if you're using weak passwords, so your NTLM hash is encrypted, fair enough, but then it has a weak password, you can run through these tools to try and crack these passwords. So the first attack that primitive that comes about because of this is the srep roasting. So srep roasting basically, actually, before we do that, maybe I can show you the whole chain as it happens. So basically, this sort of requests coming through the srep, srec, and all these things. So a quick switch over. So as I mentioned that even Windows machines have that. As I mentioned, Windows machines also have machine accounts, which are like users. So even just booting up a machine that's in a domain context will end up giving, we'll end up starting to request for these things just for the machine account. And then of course, when a user authenticates, it will make its request for the user that's authenticating to the machine. So I'll just run Wireshark quickly here. And I'll boot up one of my servers so that you'll be able to then see how this authentication, these requests for Kerberos are done. So on my screen, that I'll be using, I think it's .52. Okay, so you can already see some form of requests happening here, but then I've not yet booted the machine. So once I boot my machine, you'll be able to see what happens with the authentication. So it's just starting up. So the machine is booting, as you can see here. And as it boots, we should be able to get some requests. And you can see that all coming through. So we're going to filter these down for just Kerberos requests. And that was just the machine booting. So this is, as you can see, we have an ASREC request for a TGT, which is going from the the machine we just booted up to the domain controller that's on .50. And then from there, let me just stop this because we have enough stuff to go through. So you can see there's a request that was sent to the domain controller. There was actually 2 requests, and then we have a response from the domain controller to the server on .52. So that basically is now the ticket being received. Then from there, the server again sends a TGS request to the domain controller or the KDC. Sorry. Yeah, so as I mentioned, yeah, so from after you've received your response, you can then send now a request for a ticket granting ticket. And again, you see once that request has been received by the server, it sees that you're a valid user and you have access to certain services. It'll send back the TGS rep. So you can go through these and go through the protocols and check different parts of it. So just running Wireshark, if you run Wireshark in an Active Directory environment, you'll definitely see a lot of Kerberos authentication requests being made in the network. So basically, this is how that whole keychain we saw in the slides would look like. In fact, I'll clear this and just run Wireshark again. And this time we're going to authenticate to the domain control, to that same machine and see what sort of requests come in when a user logs in as well. Authenticate as forgotten even the users on my domain. Speedman, that's the one. So when this user is authenticating, we should also again see, as you can see, the requests coming in. We'll filter down to Kerberos, and now we have the various requests coming through. Now this is when the user is authenticating on that domain controller. So the same request, as I said, the moment you log in, these protocols are running in the background with the domain controller, and then your authenticated tickets are being stored in memory for that machine. So just to show that again, so once you've authenticated, I can zoom this. If I run klist, these are all the tickets that have been requested and stored into memory, just for this user to when they logged in. As you can see, we logged in as T Speedman and the tickets are there. So basically, this is all happening in the background. And we'll go back to the slides. So yeah, so the first attack primitive we have is called AS rep roasting. So when typically during pre-authentication, a user will enter their credentials. That's what we just did, which will then be used to encrypt a timestamp and sent to the KDC. So that's the request for the TGT. Which will decrypt that which will decrypt that request and validate that the correct credentials were used. If the key distribution center verifies and is okay with everything, it will issue now the ticket granting ticket. But there are some instances where you have pre-authentication is disabled. So that means for a specific user, maybe. So sometimes I've seen that happening where there's a Linux machine in that AD environment. And because the way Kerberos works, it may not fully be able to take all these keys and send it to that Linux machine. So domain admins would then create an account, a user account, that does not require Kerberos authentication. So basically, if that is done, if it's disabled, it will allow an attacker to request for a ticket for any user on that key distribution center, and it would simply return a TGT because it does not need to authorize. Remember, we've said like we don't need to authenticate to the key distribution center. So basically, you just requesting for a ticket, it will send you back TGT without verifying that this is the actual user. So as an attacker, it gives you a very good field to play with in terms of now just requesting for that ticket. And once you have that ticket, you can go offline and try and crack it. The next attack is actually Kerberosting. Now with Kerberosting, it's sort of similar to what you have when ASREP roasting happens, but okay, so basically this was actually discovered in 2015 by a guy called Tim Medin. So what happens in this scenario is services run on a machine under the context of a user account. So these accounts are either local to the machine or the actual domain, the accounts created on the domain. And these tend to be these SPNs that we talked about, the service principal names. So service principal names are then used with Kerberos to associate a specific service instance with a logon account and are configured on the user object in the Active Directory. So part of the ticket granting service ticket returned by the key distribution center is encrypted with the secret that's derived from the password of this user account running that service. So in Kerberosting, this technique leverages requesting for these ticket granting service tickets for services running under the context of that domain account. And then once you receive that TGS ticket, you can then take it offline again and try and crack it. Then the third primitive we have is called unconstrained delegation. So this is a unique sort of scenario where unconstrained delegation allows a user or a service to act on behalf of another service. So a common implementation of this is where a user authenticates like to front end, web applications, or like a customer relationship management server, which then also has to go and fetch information from a database server. So you don't want your user, when they're logging into this system, you don't want them to put in their password twice, as in one for the web application and then another one again for the database server. So what Microsoft did is they came up with a way in which the ticket granting service ticket from the user will be stored on the first server. So that would be the web application server, and it's stored in memory. And then whenever the user is requesting for something that may be needed to access the database server, it will then use that TGS ticket that's stored in memory to go and authenticate on the DB server, fetch the requested information, and bring it back to the user. So if unconstrained delegation is configured on a computer, the KDC, the key distribution center, also includes a copy of, as I said, this TGT inside the TGS. And then when the user accesses the web server, it will extract that user's TGT from the TGS and cache it in memory. So whenever the web server requests to the DB, it then now just pulls and sends it there. An interesting aspect to unconstrained delegation is that it will cache the user's TGT regardless of the service being accessed by the user. So even if you, let's say that's it's a web application server, but a domain admin has like RDP'd into that server or is accessing the file share on that server, the server, since it has been set to be in an unconstrained delegation context, it will just take all these tickets and store them in memory, irrespective of the service that's being requested for. So it's not tied down to a specific service. It will just keep on collecting these TGTs. So if we compromise a machine that has that is set up with unconstrained delegation, an attacker can then extract these TGTs from memory and then use them to impersonate the user that the TGT belongs to and access various other services. So for example, as I mentioned, in the scenario where a domain admin has remote desktop to that server, their TGT will then be stored in that server's memory cache. And if an attacker gets access to that server, maybe they're running at a higher privilege, they can dump out these TGTs. So essentially, they can get the TGT of the admin, the domain admin. So basically, that's almost like game over. But then, I mean, depending on the setup of the environment. So those are ways that can create a very risky situation for what do you call it, sysadmins. Now, to counter that, Microsoft then came up with another one called constrained delegation. So just like I said, unconstrained delegation allows the server to authenticate to resources on your behalf, taking the TGT along with the TGS. And as I said, it has no limit to what service it pulls that information for. So as I said, even if it's RDP, it will collect those and store those TGTs in memory. But now when it comes to constrained delegation, Microsoft realized the issue that they had with the unconstrained delegation setup. So they came up with an extension called, I think it's S4U2 self, and there's another one, I can't remember the name. I think it's something, it's again an S4U2. I'm not too sure, I won't butcher the last bit. So long story short, constrained delegation limits what services a particular machine is trusted for delegation can actually access on behalf of an authenticated user. So it now restricts, like we mentioned, we know the web server has to access the database server. So that's the only type of ticket that it will store, not any TGTs for other services that may be running on the web server. So the same thing, if an attacker gets hold of a machine that's in constrained delegation mode, you can be able to dump out TGTs but you'll be restricted to this. You can only access the specific service that TGT is, or rather that's the services that user has access to, not just anything. It will not store every type of ticket in memory. Then the fifth attack primitive we have is called silver tickets. So silver tickets are essentially forged ticket granting servers. Someone mic is on. Yeah. So as I mentioned, silver tickets are essentially forged ticket granting service tickets that will grant you access to particular service. And if I was an attacker and I gain access to a computer running a service, and I have like either admin or system privileges, I can dump out the NTLM hash of that respective account, be it the computer or the user, and then I can generate a silver ticket to impersonate that said user or computer. Then with that granted ticket, I could use pass the ticket attack and inject that ticket into the memory of, into the current session that I'm running. So basically into the memory cache of my current session. And then I can use that now to pass along and access various resources on other machines on the domain. One thing to note is that silver tickets are created directly on the compromised host, not just any host on the domain. So you have to have compromised the host that's running the service. And as I said, you also need to have reached an elevated privilege to be able to carry out the attack. With this attack, there is no, that initial stage of request and response to the KDC. So you don't need to request for a TGT because you're already on the machine that's running the service. So you can forge that ticket directly there. And then again, there's also no request from the KDC for the TGS. Because it's being done at the server that's been compromised. So the target server does not verify tickets with the key distribution center. So you have sort of a persistence mechanism on that application. That same ticket can also be used for lateral movement. So there are various angles of looking at how these attacks can be leveraged. Then the next attack, the sixth one, is the golden ticket. So if you thought like the silver ticket is bad enough, I mean, you literally have persistence on that application. With golden tickets, it takes it to another level. So imagine you forge a Kerberos ticket, and that would grant you access to any resource on the network at any time, even probably forever. That's what a golden ticket, and that's why the name golden ticket. So the golden tickets are they're slightly different from the silver ticket, because the silver ticket is a TGS, a ticket granting service ticket, whereas when it comes to a golden ticket, it's actually a ticket granting ticket that has a unique hash for a specific account that's in all domain controllers. That account is called the KRBTGT account. So that the hash for that account is then stored in this ticket granting ticket. That's why when you have a golden ticket, you have access to literally anything on the domain, because that KRBTGT hash is for a unique account on the domain controller, and it has access to a lot of things. So basically, you will have full access on the domain. So that's full pawnage. So if once somebody can forge a golden ticket on a domain, a Windows network that's running an AD, that's a very big, it's like a backdoor. As I said, it gives you persistence on that domain. And the unfortunate thing, or the fortunate thing, is depending on what tool you're using. So like when you run golden ticket through Mimikatz, it will create by default, if you just use the commands by default, it will create a ticket that's valid for 10 years. So basically that means you have persistence into that domain for 10 years. The only way that can be revoked is if that KRBTGT account's password is changed. But then again, you can't just change it once and invalidate the ticket. You have to actually do it twice for it to completely invalidate. So if somebody has done has a golden ticket to your domain, the only way you can make sure that that ticket is not usable is by changing that KRBTGT password twice. And also with this one, there's no real request made to the domain controller in terms of like that whole communication you saw, because that account is already on the domain controller. And there are certain things, or I would say information that you would need for you to be able to forge a golden ticket. So one, you'd need the domain name. Then you'd also need what's called the domain SID, right? Then there is also that you need to also have the NTLM password hash for that KRBTGT account. And then of course, a user ID that you want to impersonate. So when you use all these things together in Mimikatz, you can forge a golden ticket that will give you access to that domain for a solid 10 years. That's if the admins don't change that password. So it's always recommended to also rotate that password whenever you can. Then another attack primitive we have is called the skeleton key. So this is more of like a malware that's implanted into machines. So when a skeleton key attack is used, both NTLM, which stands for NetLAN, I won't butcher it, so I'm not going to say anything wrong. But basically, it uses both NTLM, which is the old version. So Microsoft started with NTLM as the main authentication protocol. Then they went to NTLM version 2, which was a more encrypted version. And then I think there's another one that came out, a slightly modified version of NTLM version 2. And then finally, Kerberos was the next authentication method that they used. So when you're using the skeleton key attack, basically it will abuse both NTLM and Kerberos authentication protocols. And usually, if Kerberos does not work, the next, or rather the fallback protocol is usually NTLM. So that's why this particular attack focuses on those two. So, for example, during an NTLM authentication, the hash of the master password that has been injected into LSAS. The LSAS is the process, the memory, the process that holds all these hashes and tickets in memory for that specific machine and that session that's running. So when an NTLM, when this attack has been done, the NTLM authentication hash of the master password that has been injected into LSAS will not be compared with the SAM database, but instead it will be compared with the skeleton key hash, which is the same. Therefore, authentication will automatically succeed. Kerberos encryption will also downgrade to an, as I mentioned, to an algorithm that doesn't support salting, and the hash retrieved from the Active Directory will be replaced with the skeleton key hash. So therefore, the hash of the master password will always validate on the server side and authenticate, and authentication will be successful for both methods, whether it's NTLM or Kerberos. So with that, we come to the demos. So for that, so I have a Windows machine here, and on this side I have, I'm sorry if you can hear a dog barking in the background. That's my dog in his ranting mode, and I need to, so I'll close this. So I have Covenant running here, and I have a little domain which has, as you saw, a Windows machine. There's a domain controller, and there's some servers running some services that we can try and request for TGS as well. So as soon as I authenticate, all that TGT requests have happened in the background. That. So once that runs, all is going well. Yep. Well, that actually worked with Defender on. Okay. So we have a grunt or a shell connection back to that machine. So we'll just go to interact. Now, the first thing we want to look at is the what do you call it? The srep request. But before we get there, we need to also find some specific what do you call it? Some specific information. As I mentioned, for the srep roasting, the account or rather a domain account needs to be set with does not require pre-authentication. So that's why it doesn't need to validate the TGT. It will just give out, I mean, it will not need to validate the hash of that user. It will just produce a TGT that's encrypted with that user's hash. So for that, we will use PowerView. Oh, no, actually not PowerView. There's another script use. It's called invoke srep request. So I'll just do that here. Is it not in? So basically, once I've imported this script into memory, remember this is running on the target machine, which is this host we have here. And as you can see, I can't even run PowerShell on this because of the policies that are running on this machine. So even with that enabled, I'm able to import my PowerShell scripts into the current session that I'm running once I got a callback. And I can use invoke. What was the command? Sorry, I forget the command to do this. Just 1 second. Okay. Sorry. Come on. Sorry about that. Just give me 1 sec for this. So once you run this, you can see it brings back that there's this user called Hino that has the setting enabled for authenticating to the without the pre-authorization, pre-authentication. So you can request for a TGT without actually authenticating on the domain controller. So with that knowledge, we know that there's this user. We can run a tool called Rubius to request for the TGT for this account. And we can put it in a format that Hashcat can use to then try and crack. And you notice when I got into this network, if I run who am I should be running as J Portnoy, which is the account that, yeah, exactly. And we have now this Hino account that we know has the pre-authentication, do not need pre-authentication. So as I mentioned, you can run Rubius, srep-roast, and format Hashcat, and we should be able to get the ticket for this Hino account. As you can see, we have the srep hash, and the account is Hino. So you can take this and put it, now you can take this for offline cracking. So I purposely used weak password for these accounts. So using Hashcat, I can, so I've already taken that account, that ticket, and stored it on disk. So this is the Chino. Yeah. So if you look at this hash, it's the same as that. It's the Hino macrosec 93FFAA2. Okay, so this is new, so we'll just we'll use this one. So just give me a sec and save this. Okay, so I've saved it as H2. As you can see, that hash matches with what we got. Right, so we have the 93FFA, 93FFA, and all. So I can run hashcat to try and crack that. And as I said, I purposely used weak passwords that are within the ROQ dictionary, word dictionary. So you can see the command to use is just hashcat, the type of hash you're trying to crack, the location of the hash, and the word dictionary you want to use. So if I run that, there we've managed to crack the hash, and that's the password for this user called Agino. So even we can take that and validate it. We don't need to validate. Well, we've cracked the password, so we know we have now at least one user. So aside from the user we have access as J Portnoy, we now have a second user on the domain, and we also even have their password. So you can now try and either check what privileges they have and further go into the network. So that's just by srep roasting. The next attack we'll look at is the actual Kerberosting. So for that, as I showed in the slides, there is a command you can use to look for the SPNs. So that's the service principal names that are on the domain. So for that, yeah, so we'll just run this command. And this will list out all the service principal names that are on this network. So the first one, the couple are just various things on the domain controller. So they're not of much interest to us. We have the way we talked about that KerBTGT account, but we will not be doing any attacks on that. We have an SQL service that's running on the domain controller. So remember the format we saw. So this is the type of service that's running, where it's running, and the port it's running on. So this is the service name, the account name. And we also have another one here, which is it says service account that's running on a maybe it looks like a web server. So we can look at this service account. So we have an account that we can try and request for the tickets for. So again, we can load PowerView. So this is another PowerShell script. So once PowerView is loaded, we can run this command to get domain users that have SPNs, just like the way we did with that command. Oh, sorry. And so most of the commands I'm running here are not operation secure. So running some of these can get you busted quite easily, because when you do the Kerberosting request, it will go and roast every account that has an SPN. As you saw, like we have the KRBTGT one, we have the SQL service that we saw, and then we have the service account here. So again, we can take this and let me just create another file. So we can again take this and try and crack it offline. Yes. So if we check that, it should be similar to what we have here. So this is the one we're looking at. So it's 87E729. Just compare that. 7E729. All right. So we have the ticket here. So the same thing, we're going to use RockU. This is using also a weak password that's in the RockU dictionary. But we'll just change the type of hash we're cracking. So at the part 4, come on. So basically, instead of what is it, 18200, that was for the srep hash, we're going to use 13100, which is, as you can see, it's the SPN ticket hash format. And again, once you run this, so there we go. So it has finished, and we have the password for this service account. So as I mentioned, when you crack the passwords, what are you capable of doing? So server 01. So let me just start up server 01 and see if we can access it. This is so just give it a second. My server, I'm putting up the other server. So while that is happening, this is what I was talking about, storing credentials into memory of a specific session. So we have this account, which is the service account, and we have its clear text password. So, and we know it's running, it has access to a specific service that's running on server 01. So to abuse this, let me just show you something here. So if I try and access a share on that server 01 as this user J Portnoy, remember we didn't go high. One should have the full domain name. We should get an access denied because this user should not be able to access the C drive of this server. I just typed that, sorry. Let's give that a second to run. What is that? HRV, not the name. Just give me 1 second. That server and make sure it's up and running. So we had another ticket as well, the one for the SQL service. We can also try and take that and see if we can crack it and abuse it. This is going to be for SQL. I think I have to try this one. Okay. The server is up. Okay, it seems like the machine can't see that. So let's just do the one for. This is going to change to service. Yeah. Maybe let's see if it does. Save as desktop. Save as. It's not happening. Desktop. Let this confirm. MS SQL. That's what I need to do. Yep. And then this will drop you. Oh, I'd already cracked this one, but basically it's using the same password as the previous account of my password 123 hash. Yeah, so I don't know why this cannot reach the server, but we will just change the attack primitive now to go on for the SQL service that's running on the domain controller. So if I run this now, that's the domain controller. You can see I do not have access to that, but we have now the SQL service account and it's running on that domain controller. So we can see if we can, we have the password for that account. So we can use, we can then use these commands to create a credential memory. So that. So basically, we're giving it the password that's going to convert this the clear text password into a secure string that is that Windows uses, and then we're going to have this credential stored for this specific service. So we're going to see if we have a share access. Once that runs, Starts taking long. So the other option we can do is we can actually make a token. So that's the way you're saying a token is like a ticket. It'll have that in memory, and we can use that token then to access specific things on that machine. So for example, we can, as we said, we tried checking the $C share for that Windows domain controller, but that didn't work. So we're going to make a token as that as SQL service on that domain with that password. If we get a success for the token creation, yep. So we can impersonate the user SQL service. Now that we have that in mind, let me just see if we can see the keys we have. I mean the tickets we have. That's Portnoy. So you can see none of these tickets are for that SQL service, but we have made a token that we can now use to then see if we have access to the C drive of that server. So if we now do an ls, we can see now we can read the various folders on that domain controller, because this account is on that domain controller for a service that's running, an SQL service that's running on it. To be more impactful, we can even see if we can get call it a shell or a grunt running from there. So I already have these details here: launcher, the service, and the password we used. And that's the domain controller. And if this runs successfully, we should be able to get a connection from the domain controller. And you can see process ID is started 5780. Check grants. You can see there's a grant checking in. If AV is running on it, I don't think it will work. Let's see. Sorry, just for the demo, I'll just disable AV for now. Then I'll do that again. So of course, if you had like your malware that could bypass AV or any like endpoint defense mechanism, you'd run that. But then we're just testing out what you can do with this. So we'll go again to WMI. So this time I'll just run it because this is just the normal, like the default PowerShell launcher that comes with Covenant. So of course this will get detected. That's why I said that might not have run. Yeah, and this time because AV is off, you can see we now have a grunt running fully. And you can see it's running in a high integrity. That's the SQL service, and that's on the domain controller. So if you go here, right, you can go and do stuff like Mimikatz. That will just dump out the NTLM hashes that are stored that for any user that's logged on. We know we're logged on as T Speedman on that server, so we should be able to see the NTLM hash for that user. Yep. So you can see we've successfully, but then this is, remember, with AV off, so don't think I've done any magic here. It's just, I'm just showing you what the attacks are. You need to be able to know who you're dealing with and all that. So as I said, we know that this user is logged in, and we have the NTLM hash for that user. Wow, it's already 8:20. Okay, so the other attacks are much longer. The one like for the unconstrained delegation, that was the other attack I wanted to showcase. But because of time, it's almost getting to 8:30. I think I'll end the session here, and we can go into the question and answer segment.
I'm not sure someone has a question for Amajit tonight, sorry. Unless were you guys floating, if I may ask?
That's what I was going to ask. Was it super confusing, or I didn't manage to explain properly? Even nobody seems to want to ask, even just a general question. So I don't know, maybe you guys have floated.
Stella, Brian, Victor, Varun. Varun, do you have something to add to Amajit?
Hey everyone. Thank you, Amajit, for this presentation. At the moment, I don't think I have anything to add, but yeah, maybe what I would like to ask is, for the benefit of everyone, would be maybe if you can provide some insight on how we can do these attacks in an environment where AV is turned on.
Okay, so basically the way I just remember I just used the default PowerShell launcher that's there in Covenant. Covenant has various modules, so you could probably run a command as. So you can also I think it's called run shell command as. So you can take that, and if you have like an obfuscated binary or a PowerShell script, of course, as I said, even that PowerShell launcher is just the default one. So I can create another one, host it, that will probably like pull down another malware and execute it. So you can now use basically you're running the command on the target machine. So that's why I said we're running that example I showcased was leveraging the WMI to execute the PowerShell script in memory as that user. So as I said, you can now replace the PowerShell script with anything that you want, because you have access to run commands using WMI. You have the user account and you have the password. So just be creative then.
Okay, thank you.
Can see some things on the chat. Let's see.
Maybe do we give Victor a chance to say something?
Yeah,
Victor, you can unmute yourself.
All right. I believe I'm audible, right?
Yes,
you are.
Fantastic. Well, I think for me, like I've indicated on the chat, for now, I think the explanation given was pretty comprehensive. Though I'd say I've never used Covenant to the level I've seen it being used today. So that's definitely an assignment for me. But yeah, good, great stuff. I think probably for me, I'll have to practice more of this stuff so that next time Amarjit and his friend Lather decide to finish us with another CTF like what you guys did to us in April. Yeah, we'll be ready. We'll be ready. But thanks for the presentation. Really
welcome. Speaking of CTF and AD sort of environments, there's actually a Discord group. Maybe I'll share the link with Eve or one of the reps from SheHacks. And
Yes.
you can join that because it's actually a free lab set up by the same guy who did the CTF for cyberspace, Alim.
Mhm.
And I think Varun's the only one who has managed to complete one segment of the lab. So it's also very, very interesting, like the one for that. And again, there's also going to be another, if you're going to be taking part in the Africa Hackon CTF, there's another AD environment going to be waiting for you.
I mean, the first when I was when we were going for the CTF at Afralty, the first question I was asked is, has Lava Alim is he on the panel? And of course, we were promised some good stuff, which we saw. But all the same, thank you so much. I think yeah, I'm really grateful. That's it from my end. Thank you.
You're most welcome. There's somebody called Mailer who has put something on the chat. You may not be able to perform these attacks that I've shown in HTB because they don't have large, how do I say, a lab network. Usually you're just attacking a specific one target machine. So unless you're doing the pro labs, then yes, that's an environment that's sort of designed this way. On TryHackMe, there is a paid room, I think called Throwback, that you can also try and test out these some of these techniques on. You definitely need a lab where you have multiple like servers, users, and stuff going on, because as I said, you're abusing. We landed on just a user machine. So let's say you fished that user. From there, we've now pivoted and jumped around. That's why I said these attacks either give you persistence or lateral movement access into deeper into the network. So HTB, the open free, what do you call it, challenges? Yeah, I don't see these things being leveraged there. But if you do the pro labs, then definitely those will come into play.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, there's a Discord community we have for these sort of free labs that are AD related.
Okay.
In fact, let me see if I can get the link and just drop it here. Just 1 second.
You can actually share on chat.
Yeah, that's why I was just going to drop the link in the chat here.
Mm.
Sometimes because it's a free lab and it's being done by Alim, it might be down at certain times because of this thing, what do you call it? Either network issues and stuff. So it's not, don't expect full time like it's going to be accessible. So depending on our pockets and if we can sponsor to host it, we usually then have it up and running.
That's quite thoughtful though.
Yeah, actually that was all Alim's idea. So thank him for that and at least giving us an opportunity to practice, because his labs tend to be insane.
Nice.
In fact, this particular lab, there were some of these, what do you call them, red teamers and stuff from companies in the UK and all, and people are complaining. Complaining in the sense that it's challenging. So got it finally. Yeah, so whoever is asking, Anthony, I put the link to the Discord group. So once you join, you get the details of how you can access the lab and begin your AD exploitation fun. Yeah, John, yes, this is quite a technical, because this is, as I said, this is AD and not many people may be familiar with them, with some of these things. So that's why at the beginning, I was very focused on at least getting the understanding of what Kerberos is, because once you understand what you're trying to attack or abuse, then these various attack primitives become more clearer. And as I mentioned, they get harder, like Is Kerberosting and Kerberosting are like the easiest. As I said, you don't need to even interact a lot. So like, for example, if we did the unconstrained delegation one of my servers in this network of mine has been set up with that. So I'd have to get administrative privileges on that, dump the tickets that are in memory, and then reuse those tickets to then request for other services on the domain, and then move from now that server to maybe the server 2 or to the domain controller, depending on the access rights I would have. For those who are wondering, aside from, so Kerberos is just one. There's a lot. So you have, when it comes to AD, it's not about CVEs, right? Because these are used to manage large infrastructures. So that means managing users and managing endpoints and maybe servers on that network. So there are various attack primitives that come through. So you have either group policy abuser. So sometimes you might find the example I've given for this service accounts. Never run service accounts as domain admins. So you saw that SQL service that I abused right now was in the context of a domain admin. So the moment I managed to get that password, I could then jump onto the domain controller, have administrative rights, and run tools like Mimikatz that can then be able to dump out other passwords that are stored, or NTLM hashes that could be stored. You could probably end up doing a DC sync, which is like a messed up attack, which pulls down every NTLM hash that's in the domain controller. So that's how you can now get that KRBTGT hash to then forge a golden ticket. So you see how these things, they keep layering on one another. So it's not like one attack and that's the end. You will use all of them in various ways and capacities to be able to infiltrate into the domain. So there's like group policy abuse, there's user right privileges, there is, as you've seen, the Kerberos abuses. Then, as I said, it just depends on the environment you're running on. One tool I didn't show today, but I think the previous session I had with Shehacks, we talked about it, it's called Bloodhound. So that's a very, so you saw I used a tool called PowerView, but I just used it very limited. It has a lot more you can do. So that's just like in any form of pen test or, in any form of like pen testing, you have to do, there are various phases. So you have your recon, then you start your exploitation and all those kind of things. So PowerView and Bloodhound are tools for recon. So until you know what you're up against is then when you can know what attack primitives you're going to use. So as I mentioned, Bloodhound gives it to you in a very graphical format, and it's quite easy to read and understand what your attack paths are available or what attack paths you have available, because one path can take you down somewhere and then you don't have an opportunity to maybe move out of that, but you do need to access certain services on that server. So as I said, if you're doing a red team engagement, sometimes it's not just necessary that you have to get a golden ticket and own the domain, like, getting that KRBTGT hash or getting the domain admin hash. Maybe the engagement is to protect a specific file server because it has sensitive data. So the scope of the project would be focused on how you could access that server. So using these primitives, you find your way of how you'd be able to end up getting onto that box. For those who may be wondering, aside from Kerber, okay, so that we tackled. Any site I can practice or learn more on this? Yes, Nancy, as I mentioned, TryHackMe has, I think it has some free AD rooms, but again, they will not go to the extent of this sort of thing. So most of the time, the pro labs, that's at least I know the Hack the Box pro labs are fully AD environments, and some of them, I think there's the Rasta Lab and Cybernetics. I think the two of them are fully configuration issue based. So like what I showed you today. So it's nothing about it. There is a vulnerability you're trying to exploit. It's more of the configurations you're trying to abuse. So I'd recommend checking out those. And then if you really want to learn about these things, you can also check out some courses. There's Pentest Academy has a course called CRTP, Certified Red Team Professional. It will definitely give you an overview of all these sort of attack primitives. And if you're new to AD, it's a very good course to like start getting into this whole game of Active Directory exploitation. But then it's, as I said, for if you're somebody who knows about AD and you have an idea of the different attack paths, most of the stuff on it may not be new, but if you're very green at AD, then CRTP is something I highly recommend to check out. The only challenge with that one is it uses what's called an assumed breach perspective. So everything is PowerShell. It's very heavily PowerShell oriented. And it takes the context of an assumed breach, meaning you are working through a Windows workstation. You're not going to use a command and control server to then, do the rest of your attack primitives. Yeah, Varun has posted a couple of rooms that can guide you guys into these things. Oh, there was actually one for Kerberos. Okay, I'll check it out. Oh, and as I said, for whoever wants to check out Alim's lab and you get stuck, one of our heroes here, Varun, has completed one half of the lab. I think Alim was extending to the second lab now. So Varun, has he launched it as yet?
The Wakanda one.
Yeah.
He said that we have to get now we have to access it through the last machine on Loki Lab.
Okay.
Not able to figure out a way to access.
So basically, you're supposed to pivot into that new network.
Yes. So where the Loki Lab ends, it connects to now another lab.
Okay. Yeah. So even somebody mentioned like different attack primitives. There's another one called cross forest trust. So basically, this is like where you have a company that may have various branches. So they don't want to have like one centralized Active Directory. So you'll have what's called a forest trust. So you have your primary AD, and then you have like child domains. So for example, Shehacks is in Nairobi. So they have that as the domain controller. Then there's Shehacks Mombasa, Shehacks Kisumu, Shehacks, Nakuru. So all of these other branches will become child domains. So you'll have like now nakuru.shehacks, local or .com, and then you'll have, so if you are, depending again on the configuration, so there's this trust relationships. So there's, I think it's bidirectional trust, and then there's parent-child trust and stuff like that. So depending on the subdomain or the domain that you've attacked, you can then check what sort of trusts you have. And from there, you can actually pivot from one domain into another domain.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So yeah, Varun, something to think about.
Sure.
So yeah,
Okay.
this was nothing to do with AD, with AV evasion and all that. As I say, it was more focused on just AD and specifically Kerberos.
Maybe I can say I didn't join earlier, but I enjoyed the session. I'm legit. Looking forward for more. I believe it's been the most following through Kerberos again. It's quite an insightful session. For those who are still studying for OffSec, this is the best person to reach out to is Amajit.
No, not.
This is I'm advertising you on behalf of Shehacks. So yes, you're kind of our stakeholder for this particular sessions on Shehacks. Yeah.
I think Eve, you'd actually done something on AD as well, right?
Yeah, I should do another one. We've been slacking a lot, but yeah, I should do something also with the same.
Maybe we can collab on one of the sessions then.
Yeah, sure. Let's do so.
Sawa.
Okay. So thank you so much. I think this was quite an insightful session. I hope we've learned something, and we'll have more to come. So Laura is still with us, so Nancy. Okay. So we can close this session in that case. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in for this particular one.
Thank you.
And thank you, Amajit.
Welcome.
We'll
Look
still
forward
have
to
you one more time, or even more, or even 10 or 20.
I'd be happy
Hey,
to.
Eve. Sorry, I couldn't unmute, but thank you for the session, Amajit. I'm hoping now you can differentiate the voices.
Yes. As I mentioned, there's a slight difference. It's there, but they're almost close, but there's a slight difference. Eve. So I'll be open. Eve. I told Nancy earlier that you have a bass as compared to her.
Makes sense a lot. I think mine is a little bit deeper.
Yeah, exactly, but not in a bad way. It's still female. It's still feminine.
It's okay, Amajit. We understand and we know you.
I like your voice. I'm not saying it's a bad voice, so don't take it the wrong way.
No, I can't do that. It's okay.
So.
Nancy, you can close the session for us. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Okay, good night, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us. See you next week on Tuesday. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Peace.